Fantastic. Everybody, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Welcome to Cyber Judo. Travis and myself decided that we would switch things up a little bit this week in regards to rather than doing a presentation on a particular subject or a particular topic and going through it and diving into the details of it, and then having maybe a little bit of Q&A at the end, which is really fun. We really enjoy that. What we wanted to do was switch it up and have like a Ask Me Anything format. One of the things I was just kind of elaborating a little bit to earlier with some of the folks who were just kind of a bit like on like before 9 o'clock was the fact that something that's really important to Travis and myself as we do these is that there's a balance between instructional videos that are fantastic, like Mike Myers content, right? And then like podcasting content that is put out by folks like Mike Miller. Again, awesome content. And there's places for both of those types of content that are really, really important. They have their own pros and cons, right? One of the things that Travis and myself have seen less of, though, is a format in which we can all get together.
Christian got muted.
Yeah, I don't know why that occurred there. Okay, cool. So the Travis and myself, what we're interested in doing is having a greater conversation of things, right? Where rather than just one person or another instructing you, right? Or Travis and myself going back and forth and having a conversation, which may be entertaining and may be engaging in a certain degree. We want to make sure that we're able to provide as much mentorship and coaching to you guys directly at the ground floor, be it if it's career skills, if it's technology skills, if it's cybersecurity skills, that kind of stuff, right? And being able to kind of just open that up and allow you guys to pick our brains. By no degree do I say that we're quote unquote experts, right? I think a big part of the realm of not just technology and cybersecurity, but just in life is really understanding, you know, how dangerous you are and not knowing what you don't know, right? And being familiar with that. And so really, I think that's where kind of Travis and myself sit in regards to like our careers and skill set, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to just start off with just a little bit of context and setting the situation and ground floor for everybody of like what I do in my daily role, what Travis does in his daily role. We can even open up to a couple other folks on our team, like Dennis, if he wants to chit chat about it, that kind of stuff too. And also if there's other folks and contributors, you know, that want to jump in, you know, like for example, Michael Hallman or Zachariah, anyone can jump in here and chat a little bit about your guys' background. And if someone has a question and you want to try to answer it, feel free to do that as well, right? But the context of particularly my background and Travis's background, I think will be helpful for good types of questions to ask, right? So that being noted, Travis, am I missing anything before we jump into intros?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, stupendous. So first and foremost, as you guys know, these training sessions that Travis and myself do, right, Cyber Judo, right, are all about the community, right? So Travis and myself, you know, and while other people may sell books and content, and that's great, that's fantastic, that's their deal. And there should always be a place for rewarding people who create great content. Right now, Travis and myself don't monetize what we do here, right? Nor is this a plug for my company of like, hashtag Go Vanguard, right? Put the Go Vanguard logo all over everything. That's not what we're about, right? We, again, legitimately just want to provide a forum for coaching people, providing guidance, and hopefully a lot of tips and tricks so that people don't have to go through the same pain and suffering that we have in our own cybersecurity and technology careers. So currently, I am the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Information Security Officer for Go Vanguard Security. I'm also one of the owners of Go Vanguard Security. We're a boutique pen testing firm that's based out of essentially the New York City metro region. We've been around since about 2013, 2014, right? We're an IT MSP, so I did a lot of IT MSP work. And then we transitioned essentially around 2017 into being a cybersecurity focused organization, right? A lot of what we do today is mostly in the degree and realm of red teaming services and work, right? So what you can think of as your standard penetration testing, social engineering, dynamic and static application security testing, that kind of stuff, right? When we talk about pen testing, right? Pen testing is a very wide scope in its own, right? You got the elements of network pen testing, right? Web, API, mobile. My team does all that type of stuff there, right? Initially, my organization was very small. I was the first guy to do the pen testing. I did every pen test, right? I did every pen testing report. And slowly but surely, our organization has grown at this point where, again, we have fantastic, awesome team members like Travis here, right? Our organization has a lot of different customers across a lot of different verticals of the hedge fund space and capital management and fintech and some banks and international ISPs, that kind of stuff. So even though we're small, we provide a lot of quality insight, and we pride ourselves on that. Not every firm is like that. Again, that's everyone else's own prerogative and that kind of stuff. But that is a big reason why we focus on pen testing, is because we can provide a lot of quality and expertise in that domain. I previously came from a background when I was young of doing initially software development. So I started programming when I was about 13 or 14. My brother Shane, he helped me get into kind of computers and technology. I found it very intriguing and engaging. I initially made a lot of like chat bots and some like little like online video games, that kind of stuff. That's what I was interested in when I was really young. I dropped out of high school. I did the rest of my high school curriculum through a program called Penn Foster. So I homeschooled the rest of my curriculum. I got out. I went to a community college when I was 16. I figured out, hey, well, that's awesome from a social experience. I didn't learn a lot there either, right? I was the type of person where I always like to tinker with computers on my own and program on my own. I always said to myself, you know what I'd hate doing for a career? I'd hate doing networking stuff. Oh my, okay. Having to do networking and subnetting, that is really complex. I don't want to have any of that. And so my first real job was being a network administrator, of course. And I fell into that for a solid career for about plus or minus 7 years. So I was a chief network architect at a very large multi-specialty practice medical institution in New York that did everything from, pediatrics to geriatrics, right? So I am a born and bred, essentially in my core skill set, a network infrastructure guy, building out data centers. I drank a lot of Cisco Kool-Aid, a lot of EMC, VMware Kool-Aid. I believe I got one of my friends, Chris here, who is a VMware Kool-Aid guy. Of course, it is pretty good Kool-Aid still. But that was my initial background. So I did not train to become a pen tester. I didn't train to be a cybersecurity guy or anything like that. I initially came from a blue teaming background, right? My first opportunity of doing any pen testing was one day my CTO said to me, hey, we need to do a security assessment. Do you know how to do that? And I Googled Backtrack Linux and I started playing with some of the tools, right? I didn't look at any formal curriculum. I didn't do any certifications and that kind of stuff. I fell into pen testing. I loved pen testing. I was really good at pen testing for many years, and then had the opportunity of mentoring fantastic folks like Travis, who is absolutely awesome, right? And then also meeting new folks like Dennis Carlson, who's way more talented with technology than I ever was, right, on my team, right? So that's just a little bit about my high level background and my expertise, so that it sets a frame for you guys of asking good questions that might be relevant to myself. That being noted, Travis, why don't you jump right in?
Yeah, mine is totally different. I don't come from a technical background whatsoever. My undergrad is actually in Mandarin Chinese. And then after that, I became a military intelligence officer for the Army. And you're probably thinking, Travis, can you speak Chinese? No, not anymore. I have used it 0 times since I graduated, but I can order Chinese food like a son of a bitch. You wouldn't believe it. But in the natural fashion of the government, as soon as I graduated with that degree and became an intelligence officer, I was stationed in Eastern Europe. That's right, with an entire company full of Russian linguists. And we were working in a theater level intelligence unit, doing a real world mission using signals intelligence, open source, human intelligence, all that kind of a thing. Did that for a couple of years. It was really more in a management oversight type of a role, not so much in a technical role. So even though the unit had tasking authority over tons of satellites and stuff, I didn't really get to do anything cool like that there. Second half of my military career, I went to Fort Irwin, California, which is CTC, Combat Training Center. I think it's the only one in the world actually where 2 entire brigades of tanks can battle each other, and that's how we train to prepare our units before they deploy. So for all intents and purposes, I was actually the red team for the Army for a couple of years, and what I was working on there was a much more technical program, and I was the project manager for a collaboration between the Army and DARPA, which was doing a drone swarm technology as a prototype. So it was 40 small and micro UAVs, up to 100 of them, that were using a narrow AI, and were able to be controlled by essentially one kid with an iPad to do all kinds of things, from reconnaissance to information dissemination to electronic warfare, jamming. Even cyber payloads were on the table. So that's when I first started getting exposed to more technology things, and I really started finding that really, really interesting. So while I was there, while I was in that role, I got a master's degree in IT management, which has never come in handy once. And then I also did Security Plus. And towards the end of my time in the military, I got to do a internship program, which is part of the DoD. It's called Skill Bridge or Career Skills Program, same thing. And in the last 6 months of your active duty time, you can actually intern with a civilian company. They don't have to pay you. You're still getting paid by the government. So it's a great deal for them. Great, and it's a great deal for you because you got to get that experience and it helps soldiers transition. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that with Go Vanguard. And when I first came on, because I really didn't have much of a practical technical skills, I did a lot of report writing, helping other pen testers, report reviewing, good at grammar, and I got that master's degree. I wrote a lot of papers, so I was able to contribute that way. A lot of open source intelligence and reconnaissance, putting that information together. Social engineering was a big part of it. And then progressively, as I got more and more comfortable with the technical side, I picked up things like Network Plus and Pentest Plus, and started doing more of the network pen testing sides of things, external than internal, a bit more complexity, bigger engagements. Then got into web applications, starting to touch a little bit of APIs. But at this point now, I'm the security engineering manager at Go Vanguard, so we have hands in a little bit of everything.
Stupendous. Thank you for that really thorough breakdown. Also, team, Travis and myself go back quite a ways. Travis, I think you and I known each other since what? I was like 19 and you were 15 or something like that. So a big thing in our organization and team, when we hire people as character references, character check, integrity, that kind of stuff, right? My firm primarily, again, does ethical hacking and red teaming services, right? And so one of the things that, I'll just generally note is that, when you are an organization that is breaking into Fortune 1000 companies and multi-billion-dollar banks and multi-billion-dollar insurance companies and all that kind of stuff, you really got to trust the team that you have, right? That they're not going to do something or disclose something that they shouldn't, right? And so I remember seeing a post from, again, Mike Miller, fantastic content creator and that kind of stuff, and he was talking about one of the most important traits of, people getting into the field, right? And he's a big proponent of focusing on leveraging your soft skills, right? To build your career and to get your foot in the door and that kind of stuff, and not just focusing on the hard skills, and also trying to educate employers on why it's important, right? To, value soft skills. And I would certainly concur with him in that regard, that essentially people's ethics and integrity being, if not the number one, at least close to the number one spot of one of the most important attributes of an individual, right? So that being noted, I think, Travis, let me know if I'm wrong here, but I think we're ready to jump into Ask Me Anything format, and which we'll go through some of the questions that were previously submitted, right? And then after that, we'll have people throw some items in the chat and that kind of stuff too. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. I got the list here.
Okay, cool. You want to read out the first one then?
Yeah, I'll throw it out. Where do you believe that sweet spot is in terms of foundational knowledge needed to truly begin studying penetration testing?
Travis, I think this one's perfect for you because you started, I think, more holistically than myself on your roadmap. And I think you've created a lot of good content on this.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tough one because even within penetration testing, there's still so many different areas of it. And a problem that I had when I first started coming on is I tried to turn everything into a checklist, right? I do this, then I do that, then I do that, then I do that, and I follow along that path. But that's not really how penetration testing works. And you need to have the adaptability and the flexibility to understand what you're looking at, and then understand why it's like that and what you can do because of that. And that's where the fundamentals comes into play. So if you are looking at trying to get into just network penetration testing, you need to be very good at networking. You need to understand networking, and you need to understand servers, Linux and Windows. You need not just the new stuff, but also the older stuff. You need to understand all those different protocols, how those protocols work, how they could be manipulated, or not even manipulated, but what if they are not used primarily anymore, what were they replaced with, and why is that thing better? It's a lot. It is absolutely a lot. There's no enough fundamental knowledge. It's every day I come to work. I've done many pen tests now, several dozen. I still can constantly Googling and learning things that probably should have been fundamental. I just hadn't stumbled across it yet because it's just such a vast field. We did put together, and I'll share it out in the chat here, a roadmap of skills that is general for a security engineer. We mapped those to different courses and different certifications. Not to say that you need to get all those certifications, but in a general sense, I would recommend you just start with something like the Security Plus to get the lexicon of security down. Right? You don't need the cert necessarily unless you want to work for the government. Then it's a different requirement. But get that understanding of what attacks are in a theoretical stance. Understand what kind of threats are out there. Then jump into things like Network Plus, Linux Plus. Get used to those things. If you've never touched Linux before, you need to. You really do. You can't really get around to it. And if you don't do Network Plus, because it's not nearly as fun, not nearly as sexy, and subnetting is hard and tricky, you still have to do it. It's not something that you can get around. And the flip side is true too. If you're looking more on the web application side of things, there's still an element where networking is going to be important to understand. Servers are going to be very important to understand, but you also need to think about all those different web technologies and how they work and how they interact with and what's used for, and what platforms and what frameworks are used in different circumstances. So it's not like do these 5 things and you'll get a job as a pen tester. I know that everybody's LinkedIn makes it seem like that's how it works. It's not how it works. Christian.
That's a really, those are really good notes that you make there. And a big component it is that the critical thinking and consistently discovering new resources and new techniques. Actually, I had a moment earlier, it was earlier today where it was a bit humbling, and I was watching a guy talking about hacking airplanes. And I was like, how the hell do you even start with that, right? And then I thought to myself, the reason why that guy's making that video is because that must be someone who's a pilot who also had technology skills, who then was thinking as a pilot, like, here are some logical vulnerabilities with this plane or how it's put together and that kind of stuff, right? They just had that moment where they're combining 2 different knowledge sets or 2 different types of skills together and thinking about how to exploit it. And, one of the questions we'll get into in a moment is like how to think like a hacker, right? But a lot of it comes down to when people are getting into cybersecurity, pen testing is probably the first thing that they think of. Pen testing is very, very sexy, right? But pen testing means that you're exploiting inherently, right, on the architecture of something through various logical vulnerabilities and weaknesses and that kind of stuff. You can go through a checklist, but you can think about it, it's like picking a lock. If you do not understand how locks have been built, right, and all the key components that make up a lock and the different type of locks that there are and the different security features that they try to build into locks to make sure that they're more difficult to pick and whatnot, you're going to have a difficult time being a lock picker. So I have had a lot of instances where when I chat to people or chat with people about like they want to become a pen tester, and that's the first thing, right? I say, hey, look, have you scoped the rest of the landscape around technology and cybersecurity and whatnot? Because your appetite there might be a bit big, right? And find something that's a little bit more digestible that you'll be able to wrap your head around first. For example, right? Something like business continuity and disaster recovery planning, right? That's a more corporeal thing that you can grasp and work with and understand, and then think about, okay, now from a malicious actor perspective, how can a malicious actor commit a ransomware attack and disrupt those backups or those business continuity systems? And you're like, aha, I see, right? So I do think that a lot of it has to be grounded to a foundational knowledge set. Certainly, I think that somebody can get through doing reconnaissance, network pen testing, and social engineering without a ton of technology fundamental background, right? And be able to check the checkbox on a lot of type of stuff. Certainly, there'll be some things missed, right? But they could probably get through a lot of the easier pen tests. But once you get to the web stuff, the API stuff, mobile stuff, right? Especially if you don't have programming knowledge, that kind of jazz, that's going to work. That's where it's going to get really challenging. And trying to and every vulnerability and weakness that you list in a report, if you can't explain inherently why that's a vulnerability or why it's not a real vulnerability, right? Because vulnerability scanners put out tons of false positives all the time, right? Oh, hey, this isn't a secure cookie. You know, it's like, well, yeah, but that cookie doesn't need to be secure because that's just an analytics cookie. Who cares about an analytics cookie? There's no sensitive data in it. Or, oh, you know, you don't have an X-frame options header on this URL. Well, yeah, but that's an API endpoint, right? X-frame options is supposed to protect against a clickjacking attack, right? Which is to affect a user of a web application, not an API, which is a system-to-system communication, interface. So just a couple of, high-level points to that degree. So next big one that we got for questions here is, for those who don't have a background in IT, what home projects or labs would you suggest for people to do to put on their own resume and show that they have experience? Ooh, I love this one. So like I was just talking about a little bit earlier, having a fundamental knowledge set is going to be really important. How do you start to develop a taste or a thirst, right, for technology and cybersecurity? You're going to be a really good pen tester if you're hungry for it, where you're not just getting paid to do it, but you love reverse engineering stuff. Like Dennis on our team, right? Like he just loves like reverse engineering his ISP's modem and just tearing it apart to shit. Nobody asked him to do it. He didn't do it for the glory, right? He didn't do it, to look cool or because he got paid to do it. He just wanted to do it. He was just curious, right? And so a good way to start to, like, from a Pavlovian standpoint, right? Because we're all human beings, generally speaking, including myself, can be very, very lazy. So the way I helped kind of keep myself on my toes, and I got a lot of other people to kind of get enthusiastic about cybersecurity, and even Travis himself, is think about your home network first, right? Okay, if you're using the built-in equipment that came from your ISP, right? Or using a Netgear router or something like that, go get real networking equipment. When I say real networking equipment, right? Spin up a pfSense firewall or OpenSense firewall, right? Go purchase a, Ubiquity firewall, or, spin up, maybe a Sophos UTM or XG firewall, that kind of stuff, right? Go get your own wireless access points, right? Set up a real home network. Think about the IoT devices that are on your network and that kind of stuff, right? And how much they spy on you, and say to yourself, maybe I don't want this device to spy on me. How can I find a solution that doesn't spy on me as much, right? So take something that practically relates to your own personal life first, improve your own security posture in your own personal life first, especially when your network doesn't work and you don't have internet and you can't watch, awesome videos on YouTube like Mike Miller and that kind of stuff, right? You're not going to get your dopamine hit, and you're going to like, oh, I got to fix my network. I better learn what routing is. I better learn what subnetting is, so I can get my internet, fix, and I can get my dopamine hit of browsing the internet. So that would be something I would just highly recommend. And then also start looking yourself up on the internet. Start looking up your family on the internet, right? Go to True People Search, that kind of stuff, right? When you see your name listed, right, with your address and your phone number and all your relatives and whatnot, starts to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. And you're like, okay, that starts to make you think about open source intelligence gathering and reconnaissance and all that kind of stuff. And like, okay, how could I protect myself? What defensive controls can I implement in my own personal life, right, to improve my security posture? Oh, hey, my mom is really bad with passwords and writes them all down in a notebook. We'll hook her up with a password manager, right? Those elements, right, will then translate into real career skills, right? If someone puts on their resume, by the way, like, hey, I built my own workstation, I built my own network, right? And here, this is what it is. That's going to actually be more impressive. And that shows initiative and enthusiasm. One of the questions I ask people when I hire them, and I think Dennis got one, this question as well, I'll say, hey, tell me about the workstation build you got, right? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I got this motherboard, I got this processor, I got this graphics card. And I know that they're enthusiastic about it, right? And they're hungry about it, right? And that they're taking the opportunity of applying the technology and cybersecurity principles to their own life. Travis, do you have any additional items to add to that?
No, I think that was great. I think that all of those things that show a practical way of how you're able to implement it in a meaningful way, even if it's on a small scale, is probably going to be more helpful than, say, a list of try hack me rooms that you did. Because it just makes it real, and it shows that you have those particular skills and that you can also implement them in a way that matters. And it's going to give you a great story to talk about when you come to the interview.
Yeah.
People love talking about their projects when they work.
Seriously, one of the most impressive things that I've heard from somebody in an interview, when they don't necessarily know how to answer a particular question because maybe they don't have the prerequisite knowledge or skills or expertise, a great way to respond to that is, hey, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but let me tell you how I go about finding the answer to that. And it's like, wow, I like that. I like that initiative because that shows that someone's being resourceful rather than just relying on maybe stagnant knowledge that exists in their head, right? So the same way when you say, hey, you know what? I haven't done that yet, but let me tell you about something I did in my own personal life here. I built this blah 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 blah, right? And then I go, oh, that's pretty cool. I think it was uh, not Ryan Johnson on here with us. There's another Ryan. I can't remember his last name, where he had made a script on GitHub, right? HashKitty, right? It was obviously Hashcat exists. It's a superior script to HashKitty, but he made it and he put it on his GitHub, right? He's like, hey guys, I made this. And he put it out there. And I took a look at it. I was like, wow, this is great, you know? And I gave him some suggestions how to improve that kind of stuff, but little pet projects and that kind of stuff, right? And posting those things to your GitHub and putting that on your resume, that's going to impress people, especially if you're coming in as somebody like, hey, I know I'm fresh here. I know I'm green, but let me demonstrate my enthusiasm. These are the things I'm doing in my free time to contribute. And you can see my work here. You can see my progress here, right? That's going to impress an employer, especially the smaller ones that are willing to invest in you and build your career, right? A lot more. So that being noted, I think next question, Travis, I'm going to shoot this one your way and let you take this one. So 3 things someone just starting out in cybersecurity/infosec should know, no matter if they're going to be being on the red team, blue team, purple team, or GRC. 3 things.
Yeah, the one that came to mind right away, and this is from being on the red team in cybersecurity and being on the red team in the military. It's the same team. There is no need to be adversarial to other people on the same team. At the end of the day, whether you're a red team in one organization or if you're a client being a red team as a vendor to another organization, you are still trying to help them secure their organization. So it can be really exciting, you know, when you find a lot of really great vulnerabilities and you do some great exploitation and all of those things. But it's really, really important to have the tact to, when you are communicating those things, to don't come off condescending. Make sure that they understand that you're there as a partner if you're on the red team side, and that you want to help them improve their security posture. And on the reverse side of that, if you're the blue team or the purple or GRC and you need to deal with a third-party client or something like that, don't treat them like they are going to come in here with the sole purpose in their life to make you look bad. It's the same team. There's no need to put up those walls in between it. We had an example of that this week.
You know, when I was talking about how, you know, I just fell into cybersecurity, particularly with pen testing. That was the first thing I really failed out really hard was because I came from an infrastructure background, right? And then when I saw other people not managing their infrastructure as well as I had in the past, right? And I pen tested an environment, I'd be like, hey, you know, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. And it's like, yeah, that's a great way to be condescending, right? Cause people to shut down and be defensive, right? And not collaborative, right? And they're not going to, no matter what, they don't want to hear what you want to say, right? It's always easier being a critic, right? Rather being empathic, right? And relating the situation like, hey man, you know, here are some, you know, helpful suggestions to iteratively improve things. I know where you're coming from, know this situation quite well. It's a challenging one, you know, that is much more helpful. So I concur with that, Travis. You got any other good tips?
Excellent point too. This is one of those fields where it changes super fast. You know, from the red team side, the techniques and the tools that you're going to use this week, this month, this quarter, they might not work anymore in the spring, or they might work again because there was regressions on something big. And on the blue side, there's new vulnerabilities every day, all the time. It's just one of those fields where you have to be passionate enough about it to want to always keep studying and diving in, even after you've got the job, even after you've had the job for several years. Because the minute in cybersecurity where you start to coast, you will very, very quickly become stagnant. And you might manage to stay, you know, progressing in the career field, but you will get to that point where the technical knowledge that you have, well, that may have been phenomenal a few years back, is getting dated, and it happens quicker than you would think. I mean, just from a couple of years ago, there were some things that, you know, I used to see a lot on engagements, even back in like 2021, that we just haven't seen in a year, and have to dust up and figure out, oh, what the hell was the syntax for that? I haven't even thought about that. it's just one of those things. It's deep, and you have to keep going deep to build that knowledge set. And my third point to that, it goes with that one. You have to keep up with it, but you have to pace yourself. It is really, really easy to get burnt out when you feel like you need to learn everything, or you need to be, better than this guy, or better than that guy, or better than Dennis. Ain't gonna happen. Dennis is Dennis. You just need to get yourself on a path to reach your goals, to make sure that you are meeting your expectations and surpassing your own expectations for yourself. But don't try to be everything in every field for everybody in cybersecurity. It's impossible. Christian.
Fantastic insight. I don't think I could have elaborated any better myself. So another good one I got here, and I'll take this one on, which is, what is the most straightforward path to engaging in DevSecOps? Oh, wowee. To Travis's point about being on the bleeding edge, knowing what's going on, right? Where's the industry going? What are the various trends in regards to malicious actors' behavior, right? Also, the latest trends in regards to organizations from a procedural and technology approach, how they're improving their security safeguards, right? And and in securing their data, securing their employees, that kind of stuff. DevSecOps is more on the bleeding edge of that. And certainly I would suggest that almost everybody become at least familiar with some of the foundational aspects and thought processes around DevSecOps. So first and foremost, let me explain the concept of DevSecOps, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I would suggest someone trying to get into that a little bit more. So first and foremost, a big trend over the last essentially decade and a half is organizations moving to a model of what we call DevOps, which is having your developers and your system engineers, operations, right, working closely together and essentially becoming almost one and the same individual, and in most instances becoming that same individual, right? A lot of times that person might be called like a DevOps engineer or a site reliability engineer, right? And a lot of the organizations that you guys might be familiar with, like for example, like Netflix, right, of the world, or an Amazon, right? Those organizations are going to be practicing a model of DevOps of, when you do your development, when you do your infrastructure management and your systems management, it's all being done together. And then why don't we do that all in code, right? So as much as possible, getting things in code, right? So one of the core kind of fundamental components that organizations will start to adopt first as they implement a real DevOps architecture environment is starting to define what we call a continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline, right, as part of their software development lifecycle, right? And so, hey, we make some change in our environment, we push that to a development, then it gets tested a little bit, and then it gets pushed to QA, and then it goes through a set of tests, right? And then that'll get pushed to a non-production environment or a test environment, and then that gets pushed all the way to production, and it'll roll through a set of customers in the production environment and kind of see what the user feedback is to see if anything got messed up, right? And doing as much of that as possible in code and autonomously, right? And on a regular set schedule or basis, right? Usually they'll be defined as sprints, right? And usually be associated with a software development lifecycle methodology, some agile methodology that might be like Scrum, right? That being noted, infrastructure as code will be the first part, right? Rather than provisioning a bunch of manual firewalls or a bunch of manual servers or a bunch of manual virtual machines or containers, right, that are running our code, why don't we just define all of our firewall rules, right, our routing rules, right, our server configurations all in code, right? So when you define all that in code, you can basically write out, hey, I want a Linux server that only has these specific packages on it with running these specific services with these specific accounts, and it does this specific thing, and it runs in a container here, right? And it's usually running very, very few services, right? Usually what we call microservices, right? So as you do that, right? Well, if you think about it, if you define your entire Linux server in code, that means its security posture, right? What ACLs are in place, what's the access management policy for it, what packages are installed on by default. That was all defined in the code. So a lot of the security posture now is in code, right? So with DevSecOps, we're essentially going to be moving more and more security components to code, right? And then also we have to evaluate that code because there can be vulnerabilities and weaknesses in that code still programmed by human beings, right? And so we have to have various tools like dynamic application security testing tools, right? Static application security testing tools, which will scan the code, analyze the code for vulnerabilities, right? While it's just right now, right? And dynamic tools, which are actually testing like web interfaces, API endpoints, that kind of stuff, and coming back with feedback. So if you want to get into DevSecOps, the best way to get into DevSecOps is, first off, you have to have a good foundational knowledge and understanding of DevOps, right? So somebody essentially has to be at a SRE level, site reliability engineering level, or needs to get very close to that, right? And then the best way to then start to institute that in an organization and start to get involved in that in yourself is, where can I shoehorn components of security into the software development lifecycle, into our CI/CD pipeline? Okay, when we push the code from our development environment to our QA environment, we have a tool like, let's say, I don't know, SonarQube, that scans the code, checks the dependencies, make sure that the dependencies aren't old, right? That they're not vulnerable to any major weaknesses, right? And if it is, right, it fails the build, it kicks it back to the development team to go review it, right? If it completes that set of tasks, then it continues down that pipe, right? So that would be one of the big things that I would suggest. Another big one is that for somebody to be in DevOps just in general, usually I would expect them or anticipate them to have some cloud knowledge, right? With AWS, Azure, GCP, that kind of stuff, right? So certainly you have to have a good foundational knowledge set of that. You need to be able to understand what like Terraform is, how to work with like Helm templates, perhaps like AWS, like CloudFormation stuff, or Azure runbooks, right? You have to be very familiar with that so you can define components of security in code, right? So that's where I would generally recommend from a hands-on standpoint. From a certification standpoint, that is a weaker domain on myself. So I couldn't point you to a very specific set of certifications, although I'm fairly certain that if you were checking resources from AWS, Aquasec is a very big DevSecOps company. I'm sure that they have a lot of great resources on that. They make a lot of DevSecOps tools like Claire that'll analyze like Docker containers, that kind of stuff. So again, Aquasec's probably another really great resource. I think they recently got purchased, or maybe a year ago they got purchased up. But anyways, and then I'm sure that there are a couple of more formal certifications in the cybersecurity space that I'm just generally not familiar with. But from a hands-on standpoint, those are the fundamental skills you'll need. So to that, Travis, you want to shoot out the next question?
I want to throw one to Dennis. This one is made for you, man. How do you train yourself to think like a hacker?
You said you threw this to me?
Yeah. You did a presentation on it a couple weeks back.
You did one on red teaming mindset, my man.
No, I did. I just wanted to make sure I had my music playing, and so I caught the first part, and I thought, Dennis, okay.
Stage light's on you, my man.
I know. I'm caught here. No, yeah. As far as getting into the hacker mindset, yeah, it's definitely a longer conversation to have. There is a good talk that I actually did on it for the hacking of the XOS router part 1.
Just posted in the chat for him.
Yeah. That one's good. We do a little bit at the start where I go over it. I actually sat down and had to think about it because where I come from, I normally what I do is I just kind of sit down and I think about it logically before I go into it. I think the big takeaway from that, if I had to give a TLDR, is kind of look for where the weakest chain is and then attack it. That's normally the mindset I go into when I try and break something, because generally speaking, if you're designing something and you are anticipating it to be broken into, you're going to look for, as a developer, you're going to look for, the obvious ways in, right? Like if you're I think the example I gave was like, if you're looking at a application that's sole purpose is to upload files, they're probably going to have a lot of scrutiny over the file upload functionality. They may not have as much over like the avatar upload or the preferences section for changing like, usernames or time zones. You may be able to inject into that. So generally you hit them where it's weakest as far as the most effective mindset to approach for getting into systems. As far as that's what I would say as far as the hacker mindset. And then for everything else for 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 rules to be a hacker. Generally, I like to say, personally, I try to stay on the side of providing, as Christian would say, providing good, putting good into the world, right? So rules to be a hacker, probably don't do anything malicious, right? But beyond that, I think it's a fun field. I think that you kind of when you're breaking into these machines and stuff, you're kind of it's a logic game, right? You're trying to outsmart somebody else in the sense of, they developed it this way, so how do you get around it? It's like a game of chess in some way. But just off the cuff, yeah, I think that would be my answer. I think if you want further details, I think the first part of that Exos hacker or Exos router hacking part 1 presentation, I think that goes more in depth on it. But that's just a high level overview from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first point in that mindset page that you'll see is know your adversary. When I was working in intelligence, I wasn't emulating hackers, but my job as on the Army staff there was to understand what we would call the MDCOA and MLCOA, the most dangerous course of action and the most likely course of action of whatever our adversary is. And to be able to make an intelligence assessment and provide a threat briefing of what may happen and to be able to predict, the battlefields that are going to be evolving, you have to understand what are the threat's capabilities, what are the threat's goals, and what are you going to be weakest to, because they're doing the same kind of analysis on you that you're doing on them. So if you're in an organization and you need to understand from a blue team perspective, are you trying to get into the mindset of a hacker to understand how to protect yourself? Check out the MITRE ATT&CK framework. There is a ton of information on there about all these different APTs, different threat groups, what types of organizations, like financial versus healthcare versus this versus that, what tools and techniques that they're actually using. What is their goals? What is their objectives? Are you in an organization where you're a hedge fund? It's obvious they want to do some kind of fraud, or are you in something else that maybe could be susceptible to some hacktivists that just want to defame or deface something? It's a different environment. So the mindset of a hacker is really challenging to define in such a broad way, because it can be based on a lot of different motives. Christian.
I got so much for this myself. It's a little bit of a different take than you guys, but so I come from a background where my father was a criminal, right? And my brother Justin, he used to play a lot of video games. I play video games with him, and my brother Justin was always really good at the video games because video games have a set of rules that you assume by default, right? And almost like in kind of Travis's note, in warfare, right? Like a set of honor, right? It's like during the Revolutionary War, right? When essentially during the Revolutionary War, when the Patriots started, rather than lining up like the British, right, engaging in guerrilla warfare. Right. There were breaking of a lot of the assumed rules. Right. So when I play video games with my brother Justin, I play like Call of Duty, and all the time he would use a grenade launcher and shoot everybody in the face with it. And it was a perfect way. We call it the noob tube, right, to kill people almost instantly all the time. And it was super effective. It was a misuse of the weapon. The weapon was never supposed to be intended to use that way. And it was so overpowered in that way. Right. And he was able to determine that or figure that out because he was thinking outside the box. So if you want to be more like a hacker and get in the mindset of a hacker, think outside the box, break assumptions and conventions, right? Everyone in their daily life assumes things in certain conventions. Even here right now, we assume a lot of things. And there's a certain level of trust and decorum. When I was young, and Travis knows this, right? I used to go on Facebook and purposely mess with some of the other kids in my high school by creating another Facebook page that was a duplicate of theirs. And I would download all their pictures and I would re-upload them. And then I reach out to all their friends and be like, oh, hey, yeah, I can't get into my old account, but here's my new one, right? And then I'd post embarrassing stuff after the fact, right? Just to mess with people. Nobody really thought about that, right? So breaking that convention, I think, is particularly important. If you want a couple books to help motivate you in that thought process, if you can start from a mindset of a practical joker, right, and being a little bit mischievous, that's going to be helpful. But some good books that are, I think, help me soak that mindset set up even further was 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. It's a book that, from a Machiavelli standpoint, you have to be considerate in how you practice it in your daily life, right? And like Dennis was saying, right, you want to operate with a good sense of ethics and integrity still, right? Even when you have those dangerous instruments and knowledge of how human beings think and assume things. And then a big one that was really impactful to me, that is, I don't think I've heard any other cybersecurity professional talk about, is it's called the Lucifer effect. It's by Philip Zimbardo. He was the guy behind the Stanford prison experiment. That tells you a lot about how human beings operate in regards to accepting authority and how you can get even a good intentioned person to commit heinous acts, right? Not understanding that. And so when we talk about a hacker mindset, particularly from a social engineering standpoint, I think that those two books are going to be very, very helpful for social engineering. There's a great question that Nicole has posted in the chat here that I would love to hit on here. How do you know if this field is not for you? That is a very real and important question, because cybersecurity, one of the things that we post actually right to Cyber Judo is like, hey, this is tough, right? And this is not for everybody, right? You're going to have to put a lot into it. That being said, I think there's a lot of people who everyone tries to jump to pen testing, right? They try to jump into like the cool, fancy stuff, but cybersecurity is a very wide domain, and there's a lot of important things to be done, right? One of my business partner, Blake Shalem, she is a person who is not technically gifted, right? She is not a pen tester or anything like that, but she is a cybersecurity leader. She understands the fundamentals, the principles well. She understands how to communicate to executives well about the importance of cybersecurity, right? And she's carved out that domain particularly well. So I know a lot of people who, they may not be a pen tester, they may not be a GRC analyst, they may not be a SOC analyst, they might not be a threat intelligence person, right? But they can still communicate about cybersecurity well. So those soft skills are really, really important. Leadership skills are really important. Project management and team management skills are important, right? So those are all elements of something that somebody can do that are still within the domain of cybersecurity. And then I would also say that even when somebody is not technically gifted, they can still engage with the rest of their cybersecurity team, right? To learn more and to grow and to improve and provide a lot of value. Be perfectly transparent. Blake has joined us for many social engineering engagements, right? And because of her mindset and her perspective and working with a lot of business executives and all that kind of stuff, she always has really great feedback and really, really great campaign ideas. If there's anyone I know who's good at social engineering, it's her, even though she's not from a career standpoint trained in it in any degree. And she's helped us break into some of the, most awesome, multi-billion-dollar insurance companies and that kind of stuff, right? So there is a place for everybody here, I think, right? And it's really when somebody's first getting into cybersecurity or they're considering it, the map of domain of all the different roles that can potentially exist. Most people put blinders on, they focus to pen testing. But I think that if people open up of all the different positions that exist there, they could probably find something pretty good. That being said, if somebody is doing something that's going to be more on the technical side of things, your conventional pen testing, they're going to have a very difficult time getting beyond network pen testing if they do not live and breathe technology. If they are not the type of person who is hungry to just play with technology every single day and do research and just have fun with it, right? Being a very good web application pen tester, API pen tester, mobile pen tester is going to be challenging. Being a good security architect, right? Who is not the architect who's following a checklist, but then an architect who actually creates the blueprints that everyone else uses. That's someone who's enthusiastic, who breathes it in every single day and lives it. And it's certainly not for everybody, because from a work-life balance perspective, that can be challenging. So that was a very good, real question there, Nicole. So thank you. To that, what other good questions we got here? Do we have any other really awesome ones in the chat?
I would just add on to that sentiment from you, Christian, and just say that, yeah, although you do have to live and breathe it, it's not always necessarily something that is required to be basically born with. You don't have to start off being into it, but you can actually get into it. I know a lot of people who started off in completely different fields. They started off, for instance, as like CNAs or things like that, and they've moved on to pen testing, and they're pretty good at it. So, although you definitely do have to have passion and drive for it, because it's a complex subject that you have to know a lot about, because it's constantly changing and there is a wide breadth of knowledge that you have to execute it effectively. If you have the dedication to do that, doesn't matter where you came from, you can definitely accomplish that. It's just a matter of having the motivation to tackle and overcome that.
And it's stressful too. It can, whether you're on the red team or you're on the blue team, it can be really stressful at different times and in different situations. So if you're somebody who knows that that's not a great environment for you to be in, it's not. There's a lot of things to do in cybersecurity, but just be mindful of that. It can be a very, very high-paced, high-octane, highly emotional situation sometimes.
Yeah. I think, one of the things that was interesting the other day was when I was like looking at some of Mike Miller's content, and I think like one of his like LinkedIn intro videos, one of the first things he says, he's like, hey, my objective is not to be the smartest person in cybersecurity, right? My objective is to surround myself with a lot of other enthusiastic, smart people in cybersecurity, right? And so, his role, right, is less of somebody who's trying to be the best elite hacker person, right? He's trying to be a good cybersecurity communicator, right? And educator and getting people into it, right? And so certainly I think that there is a place for everybody, but finding that place can sometimes be very, very challenging. So that being noted, I just put the Lucifer effect in here. Okay, we got another good one here in the chat. When does it get exciting? What tech are you using? Oh, when does it get exciting? I mean, I'm gonna let Dennis and Travis opine on their own a little bit here, but there's nothing like the thrill every single time we break into a server and we start lateral movement, or we social engineer somebody and we start ripping through like the systems. It's the dopamine hit for me, and the rush is just so awesome. And I'm like a child. I'm just so enthusiastic. And we do it. We'll all get on a call together, and we're like all joking and laughing and having a good time. And it's all in good nature. That's probably the thing I love the most, right? Is there's something about, I guess, while I'm a good guy and I'm an ethical guy, I love being a prankster and a jokester, right? And so I think there's just a little bit of element of my jokester side that comes out, And I'm a dad of a 10-year-old daughter, so I love like little dad jokes and little dad pranks and that kind of stuff. So I think it's very much kind of attuned to that. Travis, what about you?
Oh, the exciting part. Yes, that is super exciting. Getting those creds in when you're fishing is always super fun. I love it when I come on an internal environment and I stumble upon like just an open set of security cameras, and all of a sudden I'm just staring at all these people in their office. I don't know why. It's not even really that big of a deal. It does make a big shock and awe moment when we present the report and they just see their own face on it. But it's really fun. It gives you that kind of that sense of you've really broken into something when you can literally see inside the company. Weird little quirk thing.
That's a good point. Now, Dennis, for you, when I saw you light up, it was like a couple of weeks ago, you lit up when you found a big vulnerability in an environment, and then what you did was you wrote a set of scripts around it to exploit that vulnerability, that particular set like of APIs, that kind of stuff. Is that where it got really exciting for you, or what's the most exciting part for you so far?
So yeah, so certainly those are fun. It's I would say it has its ups and downs, right? Sometimes, I won't lie, you get stuck testing some APIs and you're not finding anything. It's mostly like paperwork at that point. But when you do find something good, definitely to Travis's and Christian's sentiment, the fun part is breaking it, right? It's the car ride there is not fun, but once you get to Disney World, I mean, it's just all there. But certainly, yeah, it's developing those scripts. I know the exact ones you're talking about. Developing those scripts and showing an exploitation of a system in depth, or high severity, while certainly not great for the system that you're exploiting or the developers that are, having you exploit said system. It is very fun. I constantly joke around and say like, oh, today's the day we get RCE. We always look for RCE. But just the process of breaking into systems it's just fun. I don't know what else to say about it other than it's fun breaking in and going and elevating your permissions, going through, moving laterally, just the whole process. It's like you're it's like you're playing a strategic game in real time and you're winning. So that's the best way I can probably put it.
That's a good one. Now, one of the questions that we got a little bit earlier that was submitted to us was, what are the best strategies for developing a technical resume when first starting out in cybersecurity? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post in a chat here. We did a session on this, and I broke down some key mistakes, some general tips, some resume specific tips, and I even gave an example of a resume that I had saw in the past 6 months that really impressed me. It stood out, right? At the end of the day, there are going to be folks where they lean more on their hard skills and that kind of stuff. And certainly that'll stand out in its own regard. Obviously, for folks who are usually newer to cybersecurity, they're going to be leveraging their soft skills more, right? So taking the opportunity to polish your resume up as much as possible and having it stand out, I think is important. I don't believe companies should be hiring people who are professional resume writers, right? I totally believe that you should be hiring somebody because they're the right candidate for the position, right? And a lot of times a senior pen tester is not necessarily going to be a resume writer, right? They're not necessarily going to be the best interviewer either, but you usually would, gauge them on those hard skills, right? And so they can still kind of pass things on those hard skills. But for the newer folks, let your soft skills shine, polish it to a fine point, right? And so what that means is, take the time with your resume to demonstrate, again, what projects you're working on with GitHub and that kind of stuff, right? Take the time to have a little bit of fun with it, right? And give it some type of custom theme, right? Or put your picture in it, right? One of the things I did way back in the day when I was looking for jobs, this was about a decade ago, right? I had all my skills listed on the side, and it was like these little bars, like these little progress bars, like it was a video game or like baseball card stats, right? People love that, right? So that jumps off the page initially, because usually when an HR person is going through like resumes, right? They only got a couple seconds per resume. They're going to look for keywords and they're going to look for something that's interesting, right? And so they need something that's going to hold them there for like 30 seconds, right? And so something that looks different, right, is what I would suggest. So that has a good example of something that looks different, that feels different, that's really interesting. If you want to take things to the next level, I love that this individual, and I've seen a couple people do this, well, they'll embed some like decoded or some encoded phrase or something like that, right, in their resume for me to like figure out. I'm like, oh, that's really cool, or they'll put like sample pen testing reports or sample security reports or some sample write-up that they did in their GitHub, right, for me to go review and look at. And that's really cool and intriguing, right? I've had applicants, they'll find my meeting link and that kind of stuff, and they'll set up a meeting with me directly, right? Rather than working with like Blake, on an interfacing from an HR standpoint, right? That's always like kind of impressive to me, right? It's quirky and different, but still, one of the things I would say that is a little risque as a resume technique, though, and I would find it funny and interesting, and it'll work with some of the smaller firms that have like these like enthusiastic and eccentric security guys, is putting a canary token in one, right? If you put a canary token in your resume or your sample pen testing reports. But if you're working with an enterprise and they seem like they're really serious folks, right? And it's the type of place where you should be wearing a tie and whatnot, I don't suggest that. They may not like that at all, right? That might land you directly in the trash, right? Or upsetting somebody, right? But if it's a smaller firm, right, that's something that's kind of quirky and fun, and they always enjoy things like that. So that being noted, other good questions. Travis, you want to pull out another good one?
Right, just one thing there. If anyone does decide to write a sample pen testing report and put it on their GitHub or something like that, send me the GitHub link on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to take a look and provide some comments or suggestions for you. I've done that for a few people so far. Mike Coleman was one of them. It's usually a pretty fun experience for both of us.
Great note there. Awesome.
Let's see. Gone through quite a lot of these right now. Got a couple questions about GRC. One of them here is, my degree was in GRC, but I feel my knowledge is lacking in some other areas, pen testing specifically. What should I do to make sure I have a well-rounded understanding before going into a job?
Oh, that's a good one.
I think that kind of touches on what you talked about a little bit, Christian, is that, everybody in cybersecurity does not have to be a hacker. It's good to be aware of all those different things, but if GRC is the focus, I'm not sure to what degree you would really need to deep dive into pen testing skills, as much as when it would be appropriate for penetration testing, and in what compliance and governance requirements would have that be necessary. Christian, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So there was another one that was also asking about like what are some of the best certs for GRC. GRC is a really weird one sometimes because and in the cybersecurity world, there's really kind of two main reasons. I mean, it does split out to be more, but there's usually two big motivators behind why someone's looking for pen testing or their interest in cybersecurity, that kind of stuff. And it's usually compliance theater or cybersecurity theater, right? Hey, we're doing something. We're checking a checkbox. We're checking a checklist. Hey, look, it looks good when it's not completely really good. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of times in cybersecurity land where things are actually kind of shitty, but like, people will like, okay, but we got some compensating thing, right? Like, well, we got a policy that says that people shouldn't be plugging and removing. Isn't that good enough though? We don't need a technical control. And so it kind of over time, this kind of like shitty vulnerability or weakness will get kind of sugar coated all the way to the point where it becomes like a jawbreaker and provided to a customer of like, look, see, we're compliant. And actually on the back end, it's a complete dumpster fire. I've seen companies with SOC 2 attestation, right? And I can't understand how they got it, or I said 27001 series certifications, right? So that's one of the areas that you're going to navigate a little bit more in GRC land, right? And so if you, there's a lot of content out there, there's a lot of certifications and that you might need to get and that kind of stuff, but a very practical one that I worked with my GRC team to kind of go through and evaluate certificates in that domain that were not wildly expensive, unachievable to get for most people, and something that actually provided like hands-on like expertise and knowledge beyond just theoretical things was the OSEG one, OCEG, right? So I got a lot of good feedback about that one, and my team enjoying that a lot more compared to other GRC certs and that kind of stuff, right? It's still, it's a wide domain and wide breadth. I would say that also know your industry and the industries you want to work with well, because GRC folks have to think about the regulatory compliance standpoint of things, right? And so depending on what business that, or that business, what industry it operates in, there's going to be different laws, regulatory requirements that apply to it, right? And their customers might want to see different things. For example, in healthcare space, right? Everyone knows about HIPAA, right? So if you're running a healthcare company, right, and you're trying to impress your companies and go even above and beyond HIPAA, usually you wouldn't look at a SOC 2, you would look at things like high trust for certification, right? Because that's like your SOC 2, but on steroids and very specific to the healthcare field, right? But I would concur with the thought process of what Travis is noting about, which is doing some level of cross training, right? In interfacing with other members of the team and not getting siloed. And that's something that we're trying to do even with our own GRC analysts. It's like have that interface with the pen testers more so they can be like, well, what does this mean, right? How can this practically apply to the rest of the defense and depth architecture for the business? Because a pen tester is not going to understand the rest of necessarily all the other policies, procedures, and functions of an organization. They're at the technical level, right? Which is super important, right? They just operate in different domains. So I think interfacing with the pen testers, with the threat intelligence folks, with the SOC folks, right? Is really, really important, right? You don't necessarily have to know exactly every little part of their job, right? But if you talk to them on a regular basis, you're interfacing with them and what's important to them, I think that that's going to be really, really helpful. So that being noted, I know we're at 10:05 here, right? And we've hit on a lot of great items. I just want to double check, make sure that there's no other big questions left. We got, I think, a couple more here.
And then one there from Justin about your perspective on what the job market actually looks like in reality for cybersecurity right now.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, okay, we got Justin here. He says, what is the cybersecurity job market really like? I see a lot of crazy numbers that seem contradictory. Over 250,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs, but super fierce competition with 2,000 applicants for each role. Are most of these unfilled jobs super high level or CIO or similar? Oh, wow. It's a really good one. There is a deficit of good security folks. There's a deficit of good technology folks. I truly see that at a lot of organizations, and I'll even see it at enterprises that are multi-billion-dollar enterprises. And it's like, wait, how many guys do you have on your cybersecurity team? You got like 3 people running this entire multi-billion-dollar business and securing it, right? Are you like serious, right? So sometimes when I think people talk about cybersecurity space not having enough people in it, and quote unquote roles or positions not being filled, it's a hypothetical It's like a hypothetical of perhaps like the enterprise. One sec here. So it's like a hypothetical of if an enterprise was going to be hiring a true team that was going to actually be able to secure that enterprise, rather than being 3 individuals, it might be 15, right? So they really should be hiring 12 more people, right? So that might be one of those statistics or factors there. I think that another big component of it, and again, a lot of other great folks on LinkedIn talk about this, but really unreasonable requirements for entry level positions. Hey, you need to have 5 levels or 5 years of expertise in this particular domain, right? And you should have previously managed a cybersecurity program, right? And you got to know, 15 programming languages and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, dude, this is an entry level SOC analyst role though. Why are you expecting all of these things? So a lot of enterprises unfortunately do that, where they make that barrier to entry really, really tough to get to, which is why usually I'm a general advocate of going towards smaller boutique companies and firms and that kind of stuff, because they really understand at the ground level what's necessary and they'll invest in their staff members, right? So I have a lot of great competitors, like for example, Michael Hallman, he just went over to Net SPI, right? I think they're a pretty good shop, a lot of us know about Black Hills, right? They do a fantastic job, that kind of stuff, right? And so they'll hire somebody who's really, really thirsty and hungry, and they'll train them up, right? That's not a problem for them. We're very much that same mindset in that regard. So it's a really mixed marketplace, and it's going to get tougher also with a lot of the layoffs that are occurring right now in the technology space, because now you have people who are fresh and new to cybersecurity getting into it. And then you have technology folks who just lost a job, right? And a natural pivot point for them from a blue team perspective is to increase their cybersecurity skills and then relabel themselves as a cybersecurity person, right? Which is what I basically did. And that's like pretty much what like Dennis on our team did, right? He came from a sysadmin background, right? And network infrastructure background, and then pivoted to cybersecurity. So that's why differentiating on those soft skills is going to be really, really important. So I do also see a lot of CIOs, to be perfectly, transparent, CIOs and CISOs and CTOs who kind of underqualified for their positions sometimes, because it gets a little bit weird where sometimes organizations will focus too much on certificates and not enough on expertise, right? So, for our firm and for, again, a lot of smaller firms, they don't care for a 4-year degree. They don't care for every certification on the book. They care about, how resourceful you are finding answers and that kind of stuff, right? And they care about what's your actual expertise and at the hands-on level to things, rather than just like, oh, I got all these certs, see, I can prove it, I got a piece of paper, but I can't really retain the knowledge or information. So it can be a tough balance though, because sometimes that's the first thing that someone will look at on a resume. If someone though is writing you off because you don't have enough certifications on your resume, it's probably not the best firm to work with in the first place though, right? So just a general note to that. So any other good questions we got here, Travis?
It's going back and forth a little bit in the chat about different operating systems, but I think at this point we have pretty much hit time.
Okay, super. So team, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. These have all been really fantastic questions. Hopefully, Travis and myself get the opportunity of doing a couple of these over the next couple of months. So again, what we'll do is we'll switch things up every now and then, do some lecture stuff, have some good conversations, maybe do a little bit of podcasting stuff, do a little bit of the AMA stuff, right? Have it where we have different folks like Dennis, right? Kind of deep dive into, reverse engineering things. So we always want to switch it up, have something new and interesting for you folks, right? Not necessarily the same exact format, the same regimented thing every single week. Certainly Travis and myself are going to try to build out a better like syllabus and curriculum of what it looks like kind of like the next 2 or 3 weeks out. So that'll be something that'll be coming down the line as we kind of more mature, right? And get a little bit more time to that. So with that, team, thank you so much. Let's stay in touch via LinkedIn, and hopefully we get to see more of your faces next week. Have a good one. Bye now.
Hey guys.